Hey friends, welcome back to the channel. My name is Ashish, and in the previous video I unboxed this little monster, the A15 chip powered iPad mini 6. In this video, I want to run a series of tests, primarily to see whether we are compromising on any aspect of iPad ownership by downsizing to the mini, even from something like the mighty M1 iPad Pro. To do that, I ran a series of tests and I must say that the results were largely promising. To get the complete picture, follow on and watch till the end. The first thing I wanted to see was how much of a difference having USB Type-C instead of Thunderbolt for the only data port makes. The reason for that is the idea of replacing both my MacBook Air M1 and the iPad Pro M1 when I go on a trip is very appealing to me, especially when or if it will be possible to do that with this diminutive computer. So I was recently on a trip to Iceland, and typically every day I had somewhere between 50 to 100 GB of video files on various memory cards that needed to be transferred to an external hard drive. The safest and quickest way to do that was to use the MacBook Air M1. And nothing's changed with that, as the Finder on the Mac remains much more robust and fully featured than the iPad OS Files app. But the results were interesting. I timed two transfers. The first was a 2.59 GB file, and the second an entire folder with 15.64 GB of data. In both cases, I was transferring the data from a SanDisk SD card onto a spinning USB 3.0 hard drive with 5 TB capacity. So the iPad mini was the slowest to transfer the 2.59 GB file, but not by much. It took 1 minute and 38 seconds to complete the transfer. Both the M1 MacBook Air and the M1 iPad Pro took an identical 1 minute 25 seconds, or about 13 seconds faster. Not surprising, since they use the same processor and have identical Thunderbolt ports and exactly the same 8 GB of RAM. However, in the case of both the iPads, once you tapped on copy, the iPad Files app kind of froze for some time, and when I timed it, it was almost a minute. Sometimes the app completely crashed, but it did load the file in memory, and when you went to the destination folder and tapped on paste, the file transfer did start. The folder with 15.64 GB of data turned up even more interesting results. The MacBook Air finished in 8 minutes and 27 seconds, followed by the iPad mini with an almost identical 8 minutes and 28 seconds, and the iPad Pro trailing by 7 seconds at 8 minutes and 35 seconds. I don't see this as a big difference, and it is very encouraging to see that there isn't any real difference between file transfer speeds between the three devices, and there wasn't any slowdown of copy speeds versus the smaller file. So that kind of reinforces my hope and belief that for photographers or videographers out in the field who want to transfer data to an external hard drive, if you have a source of power and a good dock, then the iPad mini will do a good job. Of course, with such tasks there are many variables, for example the kind of hub you use and also the kind of data, the size of the transfer, etc. But the idea was to see if there was a difference between these devices that would render the iPad mini a lot slower, and happily that is not the case at all. The next test I ran was the browser speed test between the two iPads, and happily once again the iPad mini kept up, and in certain cases it leapfrogged the iPad Pro. Both the devices were connected to a 300 Mbps connection and with a strong signal. Both were snappy, and I couldn't really tell the difference between them. That is high praise indeed for the iPad mini, because when I compared the iPad Pro with its M1 chip to my older A12X powered 12.9-inch iPad Pro, I could feel a real difference in the browsing speeds. The pages loaded a lot quicker and the overall browsing experience was snappier. So, for the mini to keep up and in some cases trounce the iPad Pro is indeed a great result. It's a similar story when it comes to opening apps. The M1 chip is renowned for its burst speeds, but thankfully the A15 chip has no problems keeping up with the iPad Pro. Most of the apps I tried opened at almost identical times on both iPads, and any difference is theoretical. I also did a RAM test where I tried to open as many apps and tabs in the browser as possible, and happily the iPad mini with just half the amount of RAM as the iPad Pro kept up with the larger iPad. Here and there you could tell that tabs in some cases reloaded very quickly when you came back to them after loading a resource-hungry app, but that behavior was also present on the iPad Pro. So unless you're intentionally trying to bog this iPad down, for regular usage, even with 4 GB of RAM, the iPad mini performed brilliantly. Now some of the limitations with the small screen point towards the actual physical size of the content on the screen. So as you can see in these examples, at 100% scaling, the iPad mini is pretty much displaying the same amount of text lines as the bigger iPad Pro. But unless you have perfect eyesight, and even then, it is probably better to change the scaling to 125% to make it comfortable on the eyes. Because text is a bit too small on many websites to be readable at the 100% scaling resolution. Some websites which are not properly optimized for smaller screens will need to be viewed at even lower display scaling, such as 85%, and you will need to switch to landscape mode to view them properly. But I think if that is the price you pay for this kind of portability, then unless you're viewing these websites on a regular basis and as a matter of course, this is not an issue, and this workaround will prove satisfactory. Now the infamous jelly scroll issue, or in layman terms, when the screen moves at different speeds in different sections. So you can actually see the screen moving like a liquid, and the left side scrolls faster than the right side when you're holding the iPad in portrait orientation. Sadly, this is very much present, and you don't even need to record this with a very high frame rate camera, as it is easily viewable with the naked eye. Not only pages with text, but apps like the YouTube app, where you have lots of thumbnails, will show this effect. But it's true that it will be bothersome to some people more than others. If I had not heard about this issue or read about it, I would not be looking for it, and perhaps I would have accepted this as a feature of this particular LCD, which it is. There is no escaping it, but thankfully it's not too distracting if you choose not to focus on it too much. But it was important to mention this so you can make an informed decision. Whilst we're talking off the display, I wanted to mention that 500 nits of brightness is more than enough to view the screen even outdoors. Previously, I've compared the 600 nits iPad Pro screen to the even dimmer 400 nits MacBook Air screen outdoors, and I did not have any problems viewing any of those. Of course, you have to remember that this is outdoors but not in direct sunlight. The only two scenarios I can think of where you would be using this in the direct sunlight would be either when flying a drone or reading when outside. For those cases, an iPhone 13 Pro Max will do much better for drone flying with its 1000 nits display, and a Kindle cannot be beaten for reading in the sun. But again, used judiciously, not a deal breaker. As with the burst performance, the A15 chip does not disappoint when it comes to intensive tasks like video editing with 4K files. It can scrub through them quite normally, and when it comes to exporting the files, it can do it in real time and sometimes even faster. Sure, the screen is quite small, but really, unless you're editing on a big external display, I don't see much of a difference between this and the larger iPads. So if someone wanted to have a very mobile setup for video editing, the iPad mini will not disappoint. Much has been said about the lack of smart connectors on the back of the iPad mini and no options when it comes to smart keyboards from Apple. There is no getting around that, and it's a matter of simple physics. The iPad mini is just too small for a keyboard case. But that does not stop you from pairing any Bluetooth keyboard. I especially like the typing experience on the on-screen keyboard with this iPad, especially in portrait orientation, since if you're typing in landscape orientation, there's very little scrolling space available to you. But typing with both hands using the software keyboard whilst holding it in portrait orientation is a very comfortable experience. The keys are much bigger than on an iPhone, but the actual device is much smaller than any other iPad, so perhaps this is the best device to use the software keyboard with. I also found that as usual the dictation function works very well on iPadOS, and I use this oftentimes to dictate long form content. The idea with the iPad mini is to keep things compact and light, and I would not add a keyboard to this, but your requirements may be different and there are no lack of choices when it comes to Bluetooth keyboards on the market that will not add much weight to your bag. On the different days that I have been testing the iPad mini, the best screen on time that I have achieved is around 7 hours. That is with real world usage and not running synthetic benchmarks. So this iPad definitely has a smaller battery and lesser endurance than the bigger iPads. But having said that, unlike the 12.9-inch iPad Pro, I found that the 11-inch iPad Pro also has shorter battery life. So the real world difference between this and the smaller iPad Pro is not that much. And considering the fact that you would be using these two iPads for very different uses, I would not be worried too much about the battery life. The only scenario where this can be of concern is if you're using cellular data on this iPad whilst on the go. In that case, you will need to plan for some sort of backup power or charger to make sure you reach the end of the day. Once again, it's a matter of simple physics, and a smaller battery in a smaller form factor leads to lesser endurance. There is no getting around this, and my usage with this iPad proves this. The iPad mini features a much improved camera over its predecessor. However, the main use I've taken out of an iPad camera is for scanning documents. Well, things remain just as good with this iPad, and it does a fantastic job of quickly scanning documents. The added features with iOS 15, where you can scan a photo for any text and copy and paste it into notes, is like the icing on the cake and can be very useful in many situations. So in my unboxing video, links in the description, I pointed out that the early adopters might face problems with the aspect ratio of this iPad. This has happened in the past when the 11-inch iPad Pro came out. Since the aspect ratio of the iPad mini 6 is different to the iPad mini 5, some apps that have not been updated to the new aspect ratio display letterboxing all around the app. The problem is these apps are the biggest and most popular ones like Netflix and Amazon Prime Video. It is very irritating to see black bars not just on the top and bottom of the video but also on the sides. This negates the bigger screen that you get with this iPad mini 6 and only shows you the display equal to the size of the iPad mini 5. And not just the full screen video, the whole app is displayed with a black border all around. Thankfully, this situation is temporary and it will be fixed once these apps get updated for the new aspect ratio. Till then, at least Apple's own apps and YouTube are correctly formatted for the screen. Let's hope the others get fixed soon as well. Since we got desktop class browsing on the iPad, it has been a transformative experience. Thankfully, that same experience carries on with this small iPad. You get the full desktop browsing experience on the iPad mini. As mentioned before, you might need to adjust the display scaling to make the content more readable on certain websites, but overall the experience is very reliable, very solid, and you can do pretty much anything that you can with the desktop Mac Safari browser. Of course, the one exception being the use of extensions, as Apple does not allow this in any way or form with iPadOS. You can run some ad blockers via the Settings app, but functionality enhancing extensions that can be added easily on the Mac are not available for iPads. But that's not just the mini, it applies equally to the gargantuan 12.9-inch iPad, which is more likely to disappoint you since it's positioned as a desktop or laptop replacement. I think we can forgive the mini here. It's targeted at a completely different use case scenario and offers portability as one of its major attractions. Much has been said about the lack of Face ID on this iPad. In my experience, sure, Face ID is generally more convenient, but on such a small device, Touch ID works very well as well. It is not hard to reach up and touch the button, and it soon becomes muscle memory. We've been doing the exact same thing with the MacBooks, so I don't see why we can't here. The advantages of Touch ID, such as being able to unlock the iPad whilst laying flat on a table or when wearing a mask, are well known. So this is neither a disadvantage nor an advantage. Sure, a combination of Face ID and Touch ID would be ideal, but do not consider this to be a deal breaker at all. Unless you're using two iPads at the same time, one with Face ID, the other one with Touch ID, you will soon get used to this and it will become second nature. In fact, when I think about the mobile nature of this iPad and in these pandemic times, the Touch ID is an asset to have when you're out and about. When I ran tests on the Wi-Fi speeds, the iPad mini was nearly identical to the iPad Pro in the same location. However, during the early days I encountered some dropped connections on the Wi-Fi. That meant that the web page I tapped on had to be reloaded as it showed no active connection. This never happened on the iPhone or the iPad Pro or even the MacBook Air. Thankfully, this has not happened since, and I want to believe that perhaps during the initial days, the iPad was busy indexing files or doing other tasks in the background which may have contributed to this. But in any case, it was unnerving then, but my confidence has since increased in its Wi-Fi capabilities. It does come with Wi-Fi 6, so it will be able to connect to the latest routers and get the fastest speeds possible. I've been using iPads off and on since the past 10 years, and in the recent years I've shifted to the iPad Pro, so naturally I went through that whole experience of trying to replace my MacBook with an iPad. But ultimately, the conclusion was what most people come to, and that is that iPads are still not mature enough software wise to completely replace your MacBook or other laptop. But we have to remember that this is intentional. Apple wants to keep these two product lines completely separate, and I realize that Apple does not want you to take the iPad too seriously, and so shouldn't you. It is an excellent device for consumption as well as content creation of a certain type, and it works very well for those tasks. But if you know you need a full-fledged computer for certain other tasks, do not try and make this into something that it isn't. For that reason, I never bought a Magic Keyboard for my 11-inch iPad Pro, choosing instead to enjoy the portability and lightweight without the Magic Keyboard, whilst keeping my MacBook Air for typing tasks and those intensive tasks that require the use of a proper computer. The iPad mini takes this theme to the next level. It is super portable, and you should enjoy the power you get in such a compact package and use it for tasks that it is well suited to. Once again, don't take your iPad too seriously. Enjoy it for the tasks that it does well, but don't sell off your laptop just yet. Now, if you find yourself in a situation where you only have an iPad mini or otherwise, and you need to run some sort of desktop class operating system on it, then there are desktop as a service offerings available in the market now. Popular ones like AWS and Shells.com make this quite simple. You can run any operating system of your choosing, and as long as you have an active internet connection, you can stream the operating system through to an app on the iPad. In this example, I'm running Linux via Shells.com on the app for the iPad. This allows me to run desktop web browser extensions on Chrome remotely and complete tasks that would otherwise be impossible on the iPad. You don't necessarily need to run Windows for this task, as all I need is a desktop class Chrome browser. So this is just an example to show that if you really needed to, you can connect to remote services and cloud computers, and without having to run a server of your own, you can have some desktop functionality on your iPad as well. The iPad mini works very well as an ebook reader. Of course, it is shining light from behind the screen at your eyes, so it will never be as friendly as an e-ink reader like the Amazon Kindle. But there are certain advantages with such a vibrant color screen. For example, when reading travel guidebooks, the ability to read and view pictures in full color and zoom in on maps cannot be matched by any e-ink reader. The size is roughly the same as an Amazon Kindle Oasis, and so is the weight. So if you like the idea of having just one device for all your needs, including ebook reading, then this just might be the answer. One of the main advantages of USB Type-C over Lightning has to do with the ability to connect to hubs and external displays quite easily. You can connect an external display, a Bluetooth mouse, and a Bluetooth keyboard and get the exact same experience as you would with any other iPad in this configuration. And since in this configuration you can also be charging the iPad at the same time, you have the most portable of setups with equivalent capability to the biggest iPad Pros. Of course, Apple has still not optimized the experience, and you do get black bars on the side of the external display since the iPad still does not support the 16:9 aspect ratio and instead chooses to display the 4:3 aspect ratio. But functionality wise, you get the same capability as with any other iPad. So which iPad would I choose? Would I buy the iPad mini 6? Well, first of all, whoever is buying the iPad mini will already be clear in their minds that they want a small tablet. And this is the only top spec small tablet on the market. At the same time, going back and forth between this and the iPad Pro made me realize their respective strengths. I mean, after trying to adjust the display scaling on the iPad mini to be just right and readable, the iPad Pro 11-inch display was such a breeze of fresh air. Everything was just so much bigger and legible. But when you go back to the mini, you instantly fall in love with its size and all is forgiven. I think that's where the clue lies, and I would choose the iPad mini over any other iPad at the moment and adjust to its limitations. I would choose the 256GB variant to give me enough space to store and move files around, because the 64GB variant here barely starts with around 40GB available when new, and although cloud storage is easily accessible now, for what I would use this tablet for, having at least 200GB of space to copy and transfer stuff would be absolutely needed. I would also add the cellular connectivity to this iPad because it is meant to be mobile, and in that configuration it would not burden a cell phone's battery for its connectivity needs. Of course, at 74,000 rupees in India, this top spec variant is not a cheap tablet. It's more expensive than the lower variants of the iPad Air and even the 11-inch iPad Pro Wi-Fi models. So you have to be clear in your mind to want the smaller tablet, and then you will love the experience. I hope I've been able to clear the air about the new iPad Mini 6, and if you like this content, be sure to subscribe to the channel for more such videos. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next one.